G'day YouTube, warbles on a lot here. Happy Southern Summer Solstice Festival to you. Happy Southern Solstice Festival to you. Happy Southern Summer Solstice Festival to you. Mayan prophecy permitting. Okay. For we are in fact coming up to the Southern Hemisphere's summer solstice in 2012. That's our calendar, when overlaid on the ancient Mayan calendar. And speaking as somebody who gets all of his electricity from a homemade solar tracking tower, I'm probably one of the few people around these days who actually pays much attention to the seasonal movement of the sun in the sky. But I came to this from the position of being a nominist, somebody who fools around with sundials. And nominists, solar horologists, as some people call themselves, we have a great deal of respect for the ancient Mayans, because it was the ancient Mayans who not only noticed the equation of time, and they were the first people to do that, the ancient Mayans also noticed the precession of the equinoxes. Now, okay, probably not too many people have heard of the precession of the equinoxes. The equinox is the day when sun equals night, equinox, equal night. And there are 2 days per year when there's 12 hours daylight and 12 hours night time. One is the 22nd and 23rd of March. The other one is the 22nd and 23rd of September. Those are the equinoxes, but they weren't always the equinoxes. The equinoxes actually move around slowly. The reason they move around is because the Earth's axis has a bit of a wobble to it. Think about that. The axis has a wobble. Not only a tilt, but it wobbles. Like any good hillbilly mad scientist, I happen to have a suitable illustration here which shows how the Earth rotates once every 24 hours. And I'm smart enough to have even rotated it the correct direction. And the Earth's axis is 23.5 degrees off centre from being perpendicular to the sun's equatorial plane. Now what this means is that if you have a bright light on this side, you get summer for the northern hemisphere because it's closer, right? If the bright light stays there and the globe orbits the bright light, so that 6 months down the track you've got the bright light over on this side of the globe, then the southern hemisphere gets more heat, more light, because it's closer to the bright light. Okay. That gives us our 4 seasons every year, because we have a 23.5 degree axial tilt, 23.25, whatever it is. What the ancient Mayans noticed is that the axis itself is doing a rotation. Okay? And it takes 21,500 years for the Earth's offset axis to do one full rotation. And that rotation gives rise to what's known as the Precession of the Equinoxes. So, how did they figure that out? Well, maybe they really paid attention to the noon mark, which has been used for timekeeping, local apparent time in Europe since pre-medieval times. One of the earliest possible forms of a sundial is a simple vertical post which casts shadows throughout a clear blue day, and the shadows fall away from the equator. The way to nail down the position of the meridian is to draw concentric circles from the base of the post, and then one is able to bisect the angles at which the shadow cuts a circle twice. This will give you the direct line between the North Pole and the South Pole, or the meridian. Okay? Now, that'll tell you when it's midday local apparent time. But if you get yourself a chronometer and set the chronometer according to midday via the noon mark on the solstice, which are the 2 days per year when the sundial actually agrees with the chronometer as to local mean time, well, 2 of the 4 days. And then, using the chronometer, every day that the post casts a shadow, at the chronometer's indication of midday, if you mark the point of the shadow's end and call that a sunspot, unquote, a year's worth of observations doesn't give you a straight line moving up and down, it gives you a figure 8. This figure 8 is called the Analemma. And the crossover point on the Analemma is the equinox. Okay? So, during the month of January, February, March, April, May, June, you've got your solstice there, July, August, September, October, November, December. That is the Analemma, which describes what's known as the equation of time. What the ancient Mayans noticed was that this crossover point moves to the other end of the figure 8 and back again, once every 21,500 years. They not only noticed the equation of time, wherein their sundials are 14 minutes slow, second week in February, nearly 4 minutes fast in the middle of May, 6 minutes slow at the end of July, and 16¼ minutes fast at the end of October. Such that, with minutes up the side and days along the bottom, we have January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. And thus, if you have the equation of time as well as a calendar, you can actually convert the time on your sundial to local mean time and thence to local standard time, and you can get your sundial to, after a bit of calculation, agree with the radio time signal. Thing is, the ancient Mayans not only noticed the equation of time, but with their naked-eye astronomy, they noticed the precession of the equinoxes as well. 3,500 years ago. And it's probably a fair question to ask, what else did the ancient Mayans know? For example, this is 400 years before Christ. It's a drawing of sunspots made by the Chinese. Okay? If the Chinese knew about sunspots 2,500 years ago, and the ancient Mayans knew about the precession of the equinoxes when they were making their calendar, what else did the Mayans know? Did they know about sunspots? Did the ancient Mayans know that we are currently in a period of solar maximum activity to do with sunspots? We've just come out of the most intense low point of solar activity since the Chinese began making observations 2,500 years ago. Sunspots are a bit of a funny topic because when there's a lot of sunspots, you get a heat build-up inside the sun, you get a lot of thermal activity, and you get coronal mass ejections. Not just flares, but great big globs of the sun being fired off by the sun. And they tend to get fired off by the sun's equator. Pick a period of sunspot, high activity, lots of solar flares. It's a bad time to be lined up with the sun's equator like we are at the moment, coming up to the southern hemisphere's summer solstice. So what it means is if the sun chooses to have a large solar flare with a significant coronal mass ejection, it can come off the sun any one of 360 directions. If we're lined up with its path, the coronal mass ejection impacts the Earth's magnetic field, and the Earth's magnetic field gets compressed and becomes stronger. If the Earth's magnetic field's not strong enough, you're likely to get plasma burn-throughs, and you get great big globs of the sun coming straight through the atmosphere and lighting up parts of the Earth. If the Earth's magnetic field is strong enough to keep the plasma at bay, you still get the fact that every piece of metal on the surface of the Earth is rotating as the Earth turns. At the equator, that's 900 miles an hour. Here it's about 600 miles an hour. If you want to generate an electric current, you get a piece of metal and you move it through a magnetic field. At the moment, the electric power distribution grid is the largest it's ever been in the history of humankind. If we get a significant solar flare with a coronal mass ejection, according to a National Academy of Science report drawing on NASA for expertise submitted to Congress by the request of the US Congress, they said we'd get 90 seconds warning of a Class X solar flare. That's if the satellite between here and the sun that would give us the warning is still functioning, but it's got 3 gyroscopes and 2 of them are dead. It's an old satellite. If the satellite keeps going, we get 15 minutes warning. It would take 90 seconds to melt the transformers at each end of every power grid on the world. Once the grid goes down, you've got 72 hours of emergency healthcare in the city because that's how much fuel there is for their emergency generators. 72 hours healthcare. If you've got no electricity, you can't pump water and you can't pump sewage. So apartment buildings rapidly become absolutely unlivable because you'd have to carry the water to the top. You can't light anything with electricity. You've got no traffic lights, and the security computer in the building's roof won't let you in the front door anyway. The air conditioning won't work. The swimming pool turns into an infested swamp of mosquitoes. A city with no electricity is a frightening prospect. So how long would it take to rebuild the system, to put it back online? 7 to 9 years is how long they reckon the National Academy of Science told Congress. 7 to 9 years is how long it would take for the technicians to rebuild the transformers if somebody keeps feeding the technician with salad sandwiches and copper wire. There's 30 days coal for the power station, stockpiled above ground, but all the coal seams are way below the water table level, and without grid power to run the water pump, the coal mine fills up with water. So effectively, it becomes very difficult to reboot an industrial fossil fuel burning electrified civilization if the grid falls over simultaneously due to equipment failure from a solar flare. So how does that gel with the ancient Mayan prediction of floods, fires, earthquakes and jaguars falling from the skies? Well, ancient Mayan for meteorite was, quote, jaguars falling from the skies. Could be a cometary shower, which astronomers are not aware of. Meteorite shower. Could be plasma burn-throughs from a big solar flare. It could also be mega cryometeorites, which is what you call hailstones the size of watermelons. If you search mega cryometeorite, you will find that such things do occur. They apparently occur because the extra heat in the atmosphere and the extra water vapour in the atmosphere due to global warming because of human-caused carbon dioxide release, which has had a greenhouse effect, means that the thermals, which go to build very large supercell thunderstorms, those thermals are stronger and they go higher. So instead of hailstones being too heavy for the thermal column of air to support when they're the size of a golf ball, they're fairly common to be cricket ball sized now, and that's happened during my lifetime. But apparently over the big heat islands, the tile-roofed bitumen concrete cities with lots and lots and lots of cars and factory chimneys and air conditioners and large amounts of heat being released industrially, as well as collected solar wise, these heat islands can sometimes generate thermals that take the hailstones up and down into the stratosphere, and they don't fall out till they're the size of watermelons. Mega cryometeorites. We've already had people whinging about alleged chemtrails because they can see there are many, many more jet, airliner and military jet condensation trails now than there were 30 years ago because there's 5% more water in the atmosphere and there are more jets anyway. Is it possible that the Mayans knew enough about meteorology to have accurately forecast how long it would take the rest of humanity to not only strip the countryside bare with deficit-financed broadacre agriculture to feed the industrial cities, but also to pump enough carbon dioxide into the atmosphere that mega cryometeorites begin to become an everyday occurrence? For some reason, the Mayans managed to have coincided their prophecy for when the calendar ends, by floods, fires, earthquakes and jaguars falling from the skies, to come, well, after peak oil, after peak coal, after peak fish, after peak timber, after peak phosphorus, after the global financial collapse, at a time when the environmental surplus has already been exploited globally and there's nowhere for the economy to grow into because you can't have an economy unless you've got an environmental surplus to exploit. Seems to me the ancient Mayans may have known a thing or two, and I reckon it's going to be a very interesting fortnight. Who knows? Sunspots, solar flares, coronal mass ejections, floods, fires, earthquakes, jaguars falling from the skies, global financial collapse, plagues, wars, famines, pestilence, sea level rise. Who knows? But anybody who can figure that one out with a naked eye and no chronometer to aid them, I reckon they're worth paying attention to, because it may not be bullshit. Maybe they knew what they were talking about. In which case, we live in interesting times. If you'll allow me to quote the ancient Chinese curse. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Head for the hills. Might not be such a silly idea. Hey. Unless you think the ancient Mayans were full of shit Ciao.